Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Halfway, more or less, into my work on this subject, I found an article called The Anti-Semitic Personality. It was published in 1945, and it was published by two of the five authors of The Authoritarian Personality, which was published in 1950 by Adorno and a group of psychology scholars from Berkeley. The authoritarian personality is called by some probably the most deeply flawed work of prominence in political psychology. So rather than debating the authoritarian personality, I intend to structure my presentations around several themes, or rather flaws, associated with this study. The first point addresses the underlying assumption that anti-Semitism is a matter of prejudice, and that the anti-Semitic subject may be defined by attitudes and personality traits. Let's note the following definitions of anti-Semitism. In Merriam-Webster's dictionary, anti-Semitism is simply defined as hatred of Jewish people. Wikipedia's definition: anti-Semitism is prejudice against, hatred of, or discrimination against Jews as an ethnic, religious, or racial group. A person who holds such positions is called an anti-Semite. And even the US Holocaust Memorial Museum states the word anti-Semitism means prejudice against or hatred of Jews. The Holocaust, the state-sponsored persecution and murder of European Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators, is history's most extreme example of anti-Semitism. Now, clearly, anti-Semitism is a matter of prejudice, but I maintain it is secondary to the actual or performative dimension of anti-Semitism. The history of anti-Semitism is the story of the violent persecutions of Jews, the Holocaust, the wars against the Jews. Prejudice or even hatred of Jews is not unlike other concepts such as scapegoating, social rejection, economic envy, or even racism. These concepts may pertain to anti-Semitism, and they can be useful in the efforts to explain the predicament of Jews in specific historical circumstances, but they fall short of accounting for the lingering force of anti-Semitism, the specificity of the phenomena in Western civilization, and above all, the horrible historical manifestations. The study of prejudice is at most the story of the acquiescent bystanders or willful collaborators. We need to explore the instigators of the acts against the Jews, the hardcore anti-Semites who lead these wars. For them, hatred of the Jews is not a matter of prejudice or intolerance, nor a personality trait. Fighting Jews is a raison d'etre, a relentless activity, a political and psychological obsession. The current vicious form of anti-Semitism, the war against the Jews in our time, is the war against the Jewish state of Israel. In previous decades, propaganda was another force in the primarily military efforts to weaken and destroy Israel. In today's world, the war against the Jewish state focuses on delegitimizing Israel, weakening its national resolve and its international support, and bringing about its fall and dissolution. The BDS movement is spearheading the present battle against the Jewish state. My reference to BDS is not limited to the particular organization and its members, institutions, agenda, and activities. The BDS movement has come to signify the new warfare against the Jews. BDS is conducting a total war against Israel. Total war, by the way, not necessarily by the sense of that many associate with Joseph Goebbels in his Sport Palace speech when he called for the mobilization of all German national resources to fight for the victory of Nazi Germany. This is, by the way, still the common understanding of total war in military discourse. The BDS total war that I refer to can be likened to the Holocaust perpetrated by Hitler, Goebbels, and their henchmen. Everything Israeli is a target of their warfare, from an Israeli item on a menu in a New York restaurant, to all products made in Israel, Israeli participation in scientific project, or even a lecture on Israel that doesn't aid the destruction of the Jewish state. Mark Yudof published an impassioned piece entitled "We Must Defeat BDS Macroaggression." He states, the BDS narrative often strays into anti-Semitism. Jews are portrayed as privileged, powerful, rich, and politically nefarious. They have too much influence with Congress, state legislators, media, corporate sector, and non-profits. Anti-Semitic behavior is stirred by the BDS movement, phony eviction notices to Jewish students in residence halls, calls for intifada in America, swastikas on Jewish fraternities, questioning of Jewish students' suitability for student government offices, efforts to disqualify students from affected offices if they receive the fit trip to Israel, and the like. I take exception with such expression as BDS strays into anti-Semitism or stirs anti-Semitic behavior or even uses anti-Semitic motifs in their activities. BDS in its goals and actions is anti-Semitism par excellence, defined as such by its war against the Jews and the Jewish state. The BDS movement was initiated by Arabs and Muslims who cannot accept the existence of Israel. They continued the Arab war to eradicate sovereign Jewish presence in the Middle East in what was initially a territorial conflict. I have to say that I think that one of the themes that came up in this conference, especially in the first session today, is the Islamic or Arabic anti-Semitism. This has become a monumental historical force and deserves a special conference perhaps of its own. I don't know if it will be possible. I don't know if the American president today will approve such a project, but I still regard or make some reservation because the war that Israel has with the Arabs and the Muslims is over some concrete issues, namely the land, territory, stuff like that. Frankly, in this context, BDS is a less formidable enemy compared to the military forces of the Arab states as supported by the Soviet Union during the Cold War, the Ayatollahs Iran of today, or even Palestinian terrorism. Indeed, the failure of these forces to destroy Israel may have inspired the creation of BDS, using the logic if Israel cannot be defeated on the battlefield, perhaps it can be defeated on the propaganda field. The danger of BDS is that it has scored some significant victories in the battle for the minds and attitudes of individuals and institutions that engage with the politics of human rights. The strategy of intersectionality mobilizes other minority groups, and their exploitation of human rights arguments have had a distinct appeal for young people in academic institutions. It appears paradoxical that many Jews and several Jewish organizations have become partners in BDS activities. Some are well-meaning liberals and Israeli leftists who take the bait that the purpose of BDS is to fight Israeli control over Palestinians. At the level of institutions or organizations, we can consider the American Jewish Voice for Peace. In their homepage, they declare, JVP proudly endorses the Palestinian civil society call for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions until Israel abides by international law. An Israeli example is, of course, breaking the silence, and I would regard them as willful collaborators or useful idiots. While these elements may be considered as simply wrong, there are other Jews whose motivation is rooted in fanatic anti-Zionism or perverse self-hatred, or, after learning it today, I think, unbridled self-adoration. However, judged by their actions, they belong to the rank and file of the anti-Semites. The third group, in addition to the Arabs and Jews, are the progressive individuals, movements, and institutions. Progressive is not necessarily a precise term. Other options are radical leftists and even human rights activists or liberals, or as Ruth Wiss put it, the nominally liberal but in fact anti-liberal. The question of naming or interpellation these type of people is important to the discourse of anti-Semitism, not necessarily for its intellectual conceptualization, but rather for its contribution to the political impact of the discourse on anti-Semitism. We noted today that we are a bit confused with how to define this new type of anti-Semitism, and I think that liberal / progressive / human rights / leftist anti-Semitic subjects, I propose to call them neo-anti-Semites. In the discourse of anti-Semitism today, the Holocaust created a situation. The defamation of Jews is publicly frowned upon, and those who engage in the present war against the Jews reject the label of anti-Semite, claiming that it's only their liberal outlook and human rights activities that drive them to criticism of Israel. Thus, Australian professor Jack Lynch, an anti-Israel activist who waved money in the face of an elderly woman and a Jewish student during a heated debate on Israel, claimed, "I had inadvertently featured an image that others then used to invoke a vile stereotype connected with the persecution of Jews in Europe. The suggestions that I behaved in any way that was anti-Semitic is entirely mischievous." This Australian professor and many others from academic or other respectable cultural circles exploit the lingering effect of the authoritarian personality that describe the anti-Semite as someone with such characteristics as a conservative attitude, ethnocentrism, nationalism, religion, and submission to authority. This view has been favored by the left in all its forms, from propagandists of the Soviet Union to the teachings on American campuses today. The new focus on Israel has created new identities beyond the traditional left-right dichotomy. Alan Johnson noted that students who recite the outlandish litany of accusations against Israel are enthralled to an anti-Zionist ideology that turns them into dedicated anti-Zionist subjects. My suggestion is to redefine them as anti-Semitic subjects or neo-anti-Semites. Identity has become probably the most central concept of our contemporary culture. The new postmodernist approach to the concept has put the emphasis on manifest performativity, actions and behavior, rather than personal, physical and psychological continuity, or the dubious concept of the inner self. The emphasis on performativity enhances my argument that anti-Semitism is not a matter of disposition, but action. Here's an influential quote from Louis Althusser: "Where only a single subject, such and such individual, is concerned, the existence of the ideas of his belief is material in that his ideas are his material actions, inserted into his material practices, governed by material rituals, which are themselves defined by the material ideological apparatus from which we derive the ideas of that subject." Okay, back to plain language. The most significant change in the postmodernist approach to the concept of identity is the emphasis on the collective dimension of identity instead of the modernist quest for particular or unique individuality. The shift from the personal to the social leads to recognition of the political force of identity. Identity defines a sense of belonging to a particular group, identification with members or role models of the group. This belonging is manifest in the present, volatile scene of identity politics. Remarkably, the activities on behalf of the identity group are often turned against alleged enemies of the group. Indeed, in accordance with dialectical thinking and sociological data, it is now accepted that one of the critical forces in identity formation is the postulation of the other. Now, the postulation of Jews as the other of the modern scene, or more precisely of the postmodern scene, is an intriguing reversal of the Jewish otherness, a change from hatred of the stranger in Christian society to hatred of the people who are recognized as the founders of the Judeo-Christian tradition and major contributors to the achievements of enlightenment in the modern world. Now, the other also involves complex psychological attitudes, ranging from fear and rejection to desire and attraction. The emotional dimension of the other summons further speculation or analysis on the identity of the neo-anti-Semite. I'll mention one point. The incidence of Jewish self-hatred applies to many on the radical left, whose hatred of Israel is part of their animosity of Western culture and not just the colonial past of Western countries. Alvin Rosenfeld has written that anti-Semitism is a passion before it is a political issue. In the case of the neo-anti-Semites, one defining aspect of their anti-Semitism is their obsessive fixation on the Jewish state. This obsession may be understandable with regards to Jews and Israelis who are fierce anti-Zionist or harsh critics of Israeli policies, or Arabs and Muslims who seek to remove the presence of empowered Jews from the Middle East. Therefore, the other troops in the present war against the Jews, those who come from liberal, leftist, progressive circles, they are fueled by what Paul Berman calls inexhaustible sources of rancor and rage. Occasionally, their passion, along with their social status, e.g. university professors, might convince some that they have a point. However, the malicious dimension of this passion is often demonstrated in revolting expressions. A glaring example occurred in late 2014 when UC Irvine history professor Mark Levine posted a rant on Facebook that says, F you, call me uncivil, but still F you, F all of you who want to make arguments about civility and how Israel wants peace. Another notable example of a vitriolic, profanity-laden social media outburst is Professor Steven Salaita, who followed an anti-Israeli litany of F-words with the claim, if Netanyahu appeared on TV with a necklace made from the teeth of Palestinian children, would anybody be surprised? In the heat of passion, there occur lapses or Freudian slips revealing the more classical forms of anti-Semitism, such as Jack Lynch's inadvertent anti-Semitic gesture, Freud's parapraxis, we can call it. But very often there's no slip. In her post, Oberlin assistant professor Jay Corriga accused the Rothschild family and Israel of downing the Malaysian plane over the Ukraine. She also posted a graphic of Jacob Rothschild with a caption reading, "We own your news, the media, your oil, and your government." The authors of the authoritarian personality called for education to help eliminate anti-Semitic attitudes. The crushing irony is that many of the new anti-Semites are associated with circles of education and enlightenment, a complete mirror reversal of the so-called authoritarian personality. And yet they present a special new case. Their self-image as human rights activists or social reformers is in sharp contrast with their irrational conduct. The irrationality is evident in their singling out one country, a rare democracy in the Middle East and the only Jewish state on the planet. Their irrationality is striking in their outlandish accusations and consistent distortions of reality with often explicit disdainful disregard to facts. Their irrationality is their obsessive fixation on the Jewish state. Their irrationality is their identification and support for political forces in societies that are the opposite of civilized progress and humanistic values, just because they are the enemies of Israel. Frankly, this irrationality is actually a form of insanity. The neo-anti-Semites and BDS actions sabotage the possibility for a peaceful resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict. They threaten Jewish-Gentile relations and they inspire jihadist movements. As has always happened in the past, the war against the Jews has also dire consequences not only for Jews. The demonization of Israel usually goes hand in hand with viewing Israel as the little Satan and US as the great Satan. David Collier observed that BDS movement has become a threat to truth itself. Like so many totalitarian movements, it enshrines a single privileged narrative without regard to fact. In doing so, it makes truth itself irrelevant. Those it designates as oppressed are always in the right. Those designated as oppressor are always in the wrong. Nick Cohen and other British journalists recently published a piece entitled Anti-Semitism Always Comes Down to Hating Freedom and Democracy. Now, these are valuable observations and valuable arguments against BDS, and I think they also have a positive political impact, influencing different governments or legal bodies to restrain BDS activities in the past, by the way, a few months, I think. not before then. So this is one final comment on the Jews' response to the BDS. In a recently published brilliant article, The Problem with Jewish Museums, Eduard Rothstein stipulates that every Jewish museum is by definition an identity museum. His general argument is, ours is an era of museums celebrating the identity of nearly every group and ethnicity, but something else takes place when the identity in question is Jewish. Rothstein discovers what he calls the American preference for generalizing the Jews out of their own identity. When it comes to Holocaust museums like the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, or the Simon Wiesenthal Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles, he observes that out of the history of the Holocaust, the prevalent message is that the root cause of genocide is prejudice and intolerance. Walter Wright's commentary on Rothstein's essays has I think, an outstanding sentence. It says, the pain of the Jews should be turned into a gift from Jews to others, something from which all can learn to become better human beings. Warning against prejudice, teaching about examples of intolerance in numerous sectors of everyday life, offering sensitivity, training to cure the disease. This, it is posited, will motivate the public not only to focus on the need for tolerance, but to do so against the background of the Holocaust, in short, as yet another gift of the Jews to the world. But intolerance isn't what animated Hitler to murder the Jews. What animated him was a vicious form of anti-Semitism. And this precisely is what animates the neo-anti-Semites of the BDS war against the Jewish state.